The wind howls across the frozen fjords of Kattegat, carrying with it the salt of ancient seas and the whispers of forgotten gods. On a cliff's edge, silhouetted against a blood-red sky, stands a figure, weathered, scarred, magnificent. This is the image that has survived 1,000 winters. This is Ragnar Lothbrok, but not as history remembers him. This is the truth. Before there was a king, there was only a boy with hunger in his eyes and ice in his veins. The year is 793. The longships have not yet tasted English shores. The name Ragnar means nothing to the world beyond a small farming settlement where survival is measured in harvests and the whims of cruel gods. Here, among the snow-dusted pine forests and rocky shores of what would become Norway, a child learns his first lesson: weakness is death. His father, Sigurd Ring, was no king. History lied about that too. He was a farmer with calloused hands and a warrior's past he never spoke of, haunted by battles that carved hollows in his eyes. His mother, Asa, had the gift of sight, though it brought her no peace. She would stare at her son with a mixture of pride and terror, as if she could see the ocean of blood that would follow in his wake. "You will be great," she told him once, her voice cracking like winter ice, "and greatness is a curse dressed as glory." Young Ragnar didn't understand. How could he? At 12 winters old, all he knew was the ache in his muscles from splitting wood, the gnawing hunger that came every winter when supplies ran thin, and the burning shame of watching stronger boys take what they wanted while he could do nothing but swallow his rage. The turning point came on a night when the northern lights danced like Valkyries across the sky. A raiding party arrived, 15 men, faces painted with ash and blood, led by a jarl named Kalf the Merciless. They came not for conquest, but for sport, to take what little the settlement had and leave ruin in their wake. Ragnar watched from behind his father's shoulder as Kalf strode into their longhouse, tracking mud and melted snow across the floor his mother had scrubbed that morning. "Your harvest," Kalf demanded, his breath reeking of mead and rot. "Half of it, and your daughter, if you have one pretty enough." The words hung in the air like an executioner's axe. Sigurd Ring stood slowly. In that moment, Ragnar saw something flicker to life in his father's eyes, something ancient and terrible, a wolf that had been sleeping too long in the skin of a sheep. "No," Sigurd said simply. The silence that followed was more deafening than any war cry. Kalf laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "Old man, do you know who I am? I've burned settlements from here to Denmark. I've fed better men than you to the crows." "And yet," Sigurd replied, his voice steady as stone, "you're still standing in my home, tracking mud on my floor, and that strikes me as remarkably disrespectful." The violence that erupted was swift and absolute. Kalf drew his blade, a beautiful thing of folded steel that caught the firelight, but Sigurd was faster. The farming axe he'd been using to split kindling found Kalf's shoulder before the sword cleared its sheath. The sound was wet and final, like a butcher's cleaver finding bone. Blood sprayed across the walls in arterial ribbons, painting ancient runes that seemed to writhe in the dancing shadows. What followed was a symphony of carnage. Sigurd Ring, the farmer, became Sigurd Ring the Berserker, a man who moved like death itself had possessed his body. He killed 3 men with the axe before it splintered against a shield. He killed 2 more with his bare hands, one by crushing his windpipe, the other by slamming his head against the hearthstone until the man's skull gave way like an overripe melon. But 15 against 1 is mathematics, not courage. They brought him down through sheer numbers, like wolves pulling down a bear. Swords found his legs, his sides, his chest. Still, he fought. Even on his knees, drowning in his own blood, he fought. Ragnar would remember forever the sound of his father's labored breathing, the wet rasp of punctured lungs struggling for air. "Run," Sigurd gasped, his eyes finding his son. "Ragnar, run." But Ragnar didn't run. Something broke open inside the boy in that moment, a dam holding back a flood of rage and violence that had been building since his first breath. He grabbed his father's sword from where it hung on the wall, a blade called Serpent's Fang, rusted and neglected, but still deadly. It was too heavy for his 12-year-old arms, too long, too cumbersome. He didn't care. The first raider he killed barely saw him coming. Ragnar swung the blade with every ounce of strength in his young body, connecting with the back of the man's knee. The scream was immediate and pitiful. The second swing found the man's throat. The remaining raiders turned, shocked to find a child covered in blood, some his father's, some his own from where he'd cut his hands on the rough grip, most belonging to their companion who now gargled his last breaths on the longhouse floor. "A pup with teeth," one of them laughed nervously. "Teeth that need pulling," another agreed. But there was something in Ragnar's eyes that gave them pause, a wildness, an absence of fear that seemed unnatural in one so young. He didn't just want to survive. He wanted them to suffer. He wanted them to know, in their final moments, that they had made a terrible mistake coming to this place. The fight was brutal and ugly, nothing like the sagas sung by skalds. Ragnar took wounds, a slash across his ribs that burned like fire, a dagger through his left hand that pinned him momentarily to the wooden door frame. He killed 2 more raiders through sheer vicious determination, though killed is generous. One he left bleeding out from a stomach wound, screaming for his mother. The other drowned in the water barrel after Ragnar, in a moment of pure animal cunning, lured him close, and then held his head under with strength born of absolute hatred. The remaining raiders fled into the night, carrying tales of a demon child who fought like Odin himself had blessed his sword arm. By the time the sun rose, painting the snow with pink and gold, Ragnar stood alone among the dead. His father had passed during the night, whispering prayers to gods that never answered. His mother, hidden in the cellar where Sigurd had shoved her, emerged to find her world destroyed, her husband dead, her home painted in blood, and her son transformed into something she no longer recognized. "What have you become?" she whispered, though whether she spoke to Ragnar or the gods he never knew. What happened next changed the course of his life forever. Word spread quickly through the settlements, the boy who killed 3 raiders, the son who avenged his father, the demon child of Kattegat, within a week. A delegation arrived, warriors and jarls from neighboring territories, curious to see this phenomenon for themselves. Among them was Earl Haraldsson, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm. He was old by Viking standards, 40 winters, but still formidable, with a scarred face that told stories of countless battles and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. "Show me the boy," Haraldsson commanded. Ragnar was brought before him, still healing from his wounds, still wearing the blood-stained tunic from the night of the raid. He met Haraldsson's gaze without flinching, something that made the assembled warriors murmur among themselves. "You killed raiders," Haraldsson said. "It wasn't a question." "I killed men who came to take what wasn't theirs," Ragnar replied. His voice hadn't yet deepened, but it carried the weight of someone who had already walked through death's door and returned. "How old are you, boys?" 12 winters. Haraldsson circled him like a wolf examining prey, taking in the boy's lean frame, the way he favored his left side from the rib wound, the crude bandage on his hand. "You're small, weak, you should be dead. Yet I'm standing here, and they're food for ravens." A dangerous silence followed. No one spoke to Earl Haraldsson that way, no one dared. The assembled warriors tensed, hands moving to weapons, expecting their leader to strike the impudent child down. Instead, Haraldsson laughed, a genuine, booming sound that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. "You have fire in you, boy. Fire burns bright but short. Still," he paused, considering, "I could use someone with your particular talents. Come with me. I'll teach you to be a warrior, not just a lucky child with a sword." "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll stay here, farming rocks and dirt, waiting for the next calf to come along, and next time you won't be lucky. Next time you'll die." Haraldsson leaned close, his breath hot against Ragnar's face. "Or you can come with me and become something greater, something the world will remember." Ragnar looked back at his mother, seeking guidance, seeking permission, but Asas simply nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. She had seen this moment in her visions. She had always known her son would leave and never truly return. I'll come, Ragnar said, but I'm not your thrall, I'm not your property. No, Haraldson agreed, a strange smile playing at his lips. You're something far more dangerous, you're my investment. And so began the education of Ragnar Lothbrok. The years that followed were a crucible that forged the boy into a weapon. Haraldsson's hall was a place of constant competition, where young warriors vied for glory and honor through tests of strength, cunning, and ruthlessness. Ragnar was the youngest by 3 winters, the smallest by a head, and the most hated because of the favoritism Haraldsson showed him. The Earl saw something in Ragnar that others missed, not just the capacity for violence, but the intelligence behind it. Where other boys fought with rage, Ragnar fought with calculation. Where others charged forward, Ragnar waited for the perfect moment. He studied his opponents like a hawk studies prey, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, the split second of hesitation that meant the difference between life and death. His primary rival was a boy named Rollo, Haraldsson's nephew, massive even at 15, with shoulders like an ox and a temper to match. The image remains, that solitary figure on the cliff, the wind whipping his cloak like battle banners, the sea churning below like the chaos he left in his wake. But now you see more, the weight in his shoulders, the scars that map his body like a warrior's saga, the crown that sits heavy on a head that never wanted it. This is not just a king. This is a man who paid for greatness with pieces of his soul. Rollo became both Ragnar's greatest rival and, strangely, his closest companion. Where Ragnar was lean and calculating, Rollo was massive and direct, a battering ram in human form. Their first real fight came during a training exercise when Rollo, drunk on mead and ego, accused Ragnar of being Haraldsson's pet, a pretty boy who won through favoritism rather than strength. You hide behind tricks and strategy because you're weak, Rollo spat, his words slurring slightly. Fight me like a real warrior, or are you too afraid? The assembled warriors formed a circle, the firelight casting dancing shadows on eager faces. This was the entertainment they craved, blood sport disguised as honor. Ragnar stood slowly, setting down the sword he'd been sharpening. I'm not afraid of you, Rollo. I'm just trying to decide if humiliating you publicly is worth the trouble it will cause. Big words from a small man. Then let's see if you can back up yours. The fight was savage and uneven. Rollo had reach, weight, and raw power. His fists were like hammers, and when he connected with Ragnar's jaw in the opening seconds, stars exploded behind the younger warrior's eyes. The crowd roared its approval, bloodlust rising like heat from a forge. But Ragnar had learned something crucial in those years under Haraldsson. A warrior who thinks will always defeat a warrior who only feels. He let Rollo chase him, dodging and weaving, making the bigger man expend his energy in wild swings and charges. Each missed blow cost Rollo stamina. Each feint and retreat drew him further into Ragnar's trap. When Rollo overextended on a particularly vicious haymaker, Ragnar moved, swift as a striking serpent. He swept Rollo's legs and rode him down to the ground. What followed wasn't elegant. Ragnar's fists found Rollo's face again and again, breaking his nose with a wet crunch, splitting his lip, turning his eye into a swollen mass of purple and black. But more than that, Ragnar whispered as he struck. I don't need to be stronger than you, I just need to be smarter, remember that. When Haraldsson finally pulled him off, Ragnar's knuckles were raw and bloody, his chest heaving with exertion and adrenaline. Rollo lay unconscious, his face a ruin. The crowd was silent, shocked by the ferocity they'd witnessed from someone so young. Enough, Haraldsson said quietly, though there was pride in his voice. You've made your point, Ragnar. But the point wasn't made for Rollo, it was made for everyone watching. The boy who killed raiders was now the young man who could destroy warriors twice his size. Fear and respect, they're twins, and Ragnar had just birthed them both. Strangely, it was this beating that forged the bond between Ragnar and Rollo. When the latter finally woke, his first words were, "Teach me." "Teach you what?" Ragnar asked. "To think like you do. I'm strong, but you're right. I'm stupid when I fight. I see red and charge like a boar. Show me how to be more than muscle." It was the beginning of a brotherhood that would define both their lives, a relationship built on mutual respect, jealousy, love, and eventually, the betrayal that nearly destroyed them both. The years passed like storm seasons, each one harsher than the last. By his 20th winter, Ragnar had become Haraldsson's right hand, the Earl's most trusted warrior, the one sent to handle the problems that required intelligence as much as violence. He led raids along the coast, not for glory but for strategy, targeting trading posts and wealthy merchants while avoiding unnecessary battles. Under his guidance, Haraldsson's territory grew wealthy, and with wealth came power. But power, like fire, attracts those who wish to either warm themselves by it or burn it down. Enter Lagertho. She appeared during a raid on a rival settlement, fighting alongside her father's warriors with a skill that bordered on supernatural. Ragnar first saw her through the chaos of battle, a shield maiden with braided blonde hair matted with blood, wielding an axe in each hand, moving through Haraldsson's warriors like death itself. She killed 3 men in the time it took Ragnar to cross the battlefield to reach her. Their blades met with a sound like thunder. "Impressive," Ragnar said, blocking her overhead strike. "Most women I know use their weapons for cooking." "Most men I know die quickly," she replied, spinning and nearly taking his head off with her second axe. They fought for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, neither gaining ground, neither willing to yield. Around them the battle raged, but they existed in a bubble of pure competition. Finally, when both were exhausted, breathing hard, covered in sweat and the blood of others, they lowered their weapons simultaneously. "I'm Ragnar Lothbrok. I know who you are, I'm Lagertha, and I'm going to kill you someday. Not today, though. Not today. Today, you've earned something rarer than death, my respect." She became the third pillar of his life, alongside Rollo. But where Rollo was his brother in arms, Lagertha was his equal in every way, warrior, strategist, lover. She challenged him constantly, never letting him rest on his reputation, never accepting easy answers or comfortable lies. "You're meant for more than being Haraldsson's attack dog," she told him one night as they lay beneath the stars after a successful raid. "You know it, I know it, everyone knows it. The question is, when will you claim it?" "Claim what? I have wealth, respect, purpose." "You have servitude dressed as success," she interrupted. "You're a wolf who thinks he's free because his chain is long, but it's still a chain, Ragnar. And someday, Haraldsson will pull it, and you'll have to decide if you're going to obey or bite the hand that feeds you." Her words proved prophetic. The breaking point came during the winter of Ragnar's 25th year, when Haraldsson ordered him to raid a settlement to the north, a peaceful community of farmers and fishermen who had done nothing to warrant attack, except exist on land Haraldsson coveted. "Burn it," Haraldsson commanded. "Kill the men, take the women and children as thralls, leave nothing standing." For the first time in 13 years, Ragnar questioned an order. "Why? They have nothing we need. They're not a threat." "Because I command it." Haraldsson's face turned purple with rage. "Because I say so, and you obey, or have you forgotten who pulled you from the mud and made you what you are?" The whole went silent. Every warrior present understood what was happening. This was a test of loyalty, a public assertion of dominance. If Ragnar refused, he would be declaring himself an enemy. If he obeyed, he would be sacrificing the last piece of the boy who fought to protect his family. "I haven't forgotten," Ragnar said quietly, "but I also haven't forgotten why I fight, and it's not to terrorize farmers who want nothing but to survive." "Then you're a fool," Haraldsson said coldly, "and fools die in this world." "Perhaps, but at least I'll die as myself, not as your shadow." The challenge was implicit. The air in the hall crackled with tension. Hands moved to weapons. Warriors chose sides with glances and subtle shifts of position. Rollo moved to stand beside Ragnar, an act of loyalty that shocked everyone, including Ragnar himself. Lagertha was already there, hand on her axe, eyes daring anyone to make a move. "You would betray me," Haraldsson asked Rollo, "your own blood." "I'm standing with the man who taught me that strength without honor is just brutality," Rollo replied. You used to know that, uncle. Somewhere along the way you forgot. What followed was the briefest of civil wars, 3 days of violence that split Haraldsson's territory in half. Warriors who had fought together for years now faced each other across shield walls. The conflict culminated in single combat between Ragnar and Haraldsson, held at dawn on the same cliff where our image is frozen for eternity. The old earl was still formidable, his decades of experience evident in every parry and counterattack. But age is a debt that eventually comes due. Ragnar was faster, hungrier, driven by a vision of something better than the cycle of endless raiding and subjugation. Their blades sang in the cold morning air. Blood fell on snow, melting it instantly. When the end came, it was almost gentle. Ragnar's sword found the gap in Haraldsson's guard, sliding between ribs to find the heart. "I'm sorry," Ragnar whispered, lowering his mentor to the ground. "Don't be," Haraldsson gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "You're what I should have been, what I could have been if I hadn't let power corrupt me. Rule well, Ragnar, rule justly. And when the darkness comes for you, because it will, remember this moment. Remember what happens when we lose ourselves to ambition." He died as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And Ragnar Lothbrok became king. But kingship was not what he imagined. The crown was heavy, pressing down on him like the weight of all the expectations and dreams of those who followed him. He had warriors to feed, territories to manage, rivals to suppress, allies to cultivate. The man who wanted to be different found himself making the same impossible choices Haraldsson had made. The first test came quickly. A neighboring jarl named Borg offered an alliance, marriage to his daughter, a timid girl named Aslaug, in exchange for military support against a common enemy. It was politically brilliant, strategically necessary, and personally devastating. Ragnar was already married to Lagertha, already committed to the woman who had fought beside him, bled with him, made him better. "It's just politics," his advisors said. "Take the second wife, Lagertha will understand." But Lagertha didn't understand, or rather, she understood too well. "You're already becoming him," she said, her voice cold as winter ice. "Already making compromises, already putting power above people. It's not about power, it's about survival. If we don't have allies, we'll be crushed by those who do." "Then be crushed," she screamed. "At least you'll be crushed as yourself, not as some hollow version wearing a crown." The argument shattered something between them. In the end, Ragnar took the second wife, and Lagertha left, not in anger, but in sorrow. She walked away from the man she loved because she refused to watch him destroy himself slowly. "When you remember who you are," she told him at their final parting, "you know where to find me." He watched her go, feeling pieces of his soul leave with her. The betrayal came from the person he least expected, Rollo. His brother, his closest friend, the man who stood by him against Haraldsson, Rollo, who had grown tired of always being second, always being the muscle while Ragnar was the mind, always being the shadow of a legend. Jealousy is a poison that works slowly, accumulating over years until it finally reaches the heart. Rollo made a deal with Frankish invaders, offering to lead them to Kattegat in exchange for land and titles of his own. The betrayal was discovered only when scouts spotted the approaching fleet, ships marked with foreign symbols, guided by someone who knew all of Ragnar's defenses. The battle that followed was apocalyptic. Ragnar led his warriors in a desperate defense, fighting with a fury born of heartbreak. He killed dozens, his sword arm never tiring, his voice hoarse from shouting orders and war cries. But numbers matter, and the Franks kept coming like a tide that couldn't be stopped. When Ragnar finally confronted Rollo on the battlefield, surrounded by the dead and dying, both men were exhausted beyond measure. "Why?" Ragnar gasped. "We were brothers." "We were never brothers," Rollo roared back. "I was your tool, your weapon, always following, never leading, always in your shadow. I'm tired, Ragnar, tired of being the one nobody sings about. So you'll be the one they curse instead, the betrayer, the oath breaker. Is that legacy better?" The question hung between them like an executioner's blade, and in Rollo's eyes, Ragnar saw something that broke his heart more than the betrayal itself. He saw regret. He saw a man who had already realized his mistake, but was too proud to turn back. "I'm sorry," Rollo whispered, "but I can't be second anymore." They fought, but neither could bring himself to deliver a killing blow. The battle ended in stalemate, the Franks retreating with their casualties too heavy to continue, Rollo disappearing into the night, leaving Ragnar standing alone among the bodies of warriors who had trusted him to keep them safe. That night, as Kattegat burned and the cries of the wounded filled the air, Ragnar climbed to the cliff where he had killed Haraldsson years before. He stood at the edge, looking out at the dark sea, feeling the weight of his crown like a physical thing crushing him. And then he heard her voice. "Still alive, I see." Lagertha emerged from the shadows, older, scarred from her own battles, but still magnificent. She had returned with warriors from her own settlement when she heard of the attack, arriving too late for the main battle, but in time for what mattered most. "I failed," Ragnar said simply. "Everything I tried to build, everything I tried to be, it's ashes and blood." "No," she said firmly, stepping beside him. "You survived. You kept fighting when others would have given up. You made hard choices and lived with the consequences. That's not failure, Ragnar, that's life. Haraldsson warned me. He told me the darkness would come. I didn't listen." The darkness always comes, for all of us. The question isn't whether we'll face it, it's whether we let it define us. She took his hand, her grip strong and certain. "You are not your mistakes. You are not your regrets. You are the boy who fought raiders to protect his family. You are the man who chose honor over easy power. You are the king who tries to be better than those who came before, even when you fail. What if I can't? What if I'm just repeating the same cycle? Then you try again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until you die. That's what separates men from monsters, Ragnar, not that they don't make mistakes, but that they keep trying to be better despite them." As dawn broke, painting the world in shades of hope, Ragnar understood the truth that would carry him through the rest of his days. Greatness isn't measured in victories or territories or the songs skalds sing. It's measured in the moments when you choose to stand up after being knocked down. It's measured in the courage to try again after failure. It's measured in the willingness to carry on when every part of you wants to surrender. The image on the cliff, the one that survives 1,000 years, is not a conqueror celebrating victory. It's a man who has lost everything and chosen to keep going anyway. It's a warrior who has been broken and rebuilt himself, stronger in the broken places. It's a king who understands that the crown is not a prize, but a responsibility. This is Ragnar Lothbrok, not the legend, not the myth, the man. And his story, the real story, is not about conquest or glory. It's about something far more powerful and far more human, the refusal to surrender to despair, even when despair seems like the only reasonable option. Years later, when Ragnar finally fell in battle, they say he died with a smile on his face, not because he was eager for Valhalla, but because he had finally made peace with the journey. He had loved and lost. He had trusted and been betrayed. He had tried to be better than his nature and failed more times than he succeeded. But he had tried. And in the trying, he had become something greater than a king. He had become a reminder that we are all fighting battles against our own darkness, that we all carry scars from choices we regret, that we all stand on cliffs, looking into the abyss and wondering if we have the strength to turn away. The Viking legacy is not about conquest. It's about courage, not the courage to kill, but the courage to live fully, honestly, authentically, even when the world breaks you again and again. So when you see that image, the warrior king on the cliff, facing the storm, remember, you are looking at yourself. Every person who has ever struggled with their own nature, every person who has tried to be better than their worst impulses, every person who has stood at the edge and chosen to step back and try again. That is the untold story of Ragnar Lothbrok. That is the story of all of us. And it is a story worth telling. We are all Vikings, standing on our own cliffs, facing our own storms. The question is not whether we'll face the darkness, it's whether we'll find the courage to keep carrying the light.